It all begins at the end of a massive battle, with fallen soldiers and weapons scattered everywhere. In the middle of it all was the Mick, completely beaten down after taking a devastating blow. Gasping for air, he notices that the holy sword of the Order has pierced right through his heart with absolute precision. Meanwhile, the knights around him celebrate, exhausted and relieved to have finally captured the scoundrel. The target of this relentless hunt was known to everyone as the true fiend of the continent. This was Archimonde, the dreaded necromancer, who can now barely stand with so many arrows and swords stuck in his body. Completely battered, the Mick accepts that his time is finally up after fighting for so long. All of this is the result of the massive 10-year continental war, where a small elite squad slipped behind enemy lines while the Imperial Army launched a frontal assault. He had actually anticipated this strategy and set up a secure defensive line, but at the end of the day, he failed miserably. That was his absolute and unquestionable defeat at the hands of humanity. But this entire tragedy only came to pass because of a single knight, Berkel Rhineland, the renowned leader of the Northern Knights. Approaching calmly, Berkel makes it clear that he did not achieve this victory using only his own strength. His blade only managed to reach the necromancer after countless allies gave it their all and held the front line with their own lives. He then tells Archimonde to throw in the towel once and for all in the name of the continent's long-awaited peace. However, the necromancer tells the hero to shut his mouth. He points out that everyone just stood on the sidelines while people fell to the plague, and now they cry for peace while acting worse than wild animals, and says their beliefs are completely hollow, and that they are a bunch of wretched hypocrites. Consumed by rage, the Manga gathers pure magic and threatens to take down every single human there with his bare hands. The soldiers step back, terrified by the absurd pressure he can still give off even while at the end of his rope. They realize the imminent danger and shout warnings that the scoundrel is still trying to cast spells in that condition. Everyone wants to strike before it is too late, but Berkel simply orders everyone to stand down. The hero recalls that 20 million innocent souls fell to the plague, and Archimonde turned all of them into his army, which was the spark that ignited the war. The Mick laughs with deep disdain, asking if the knight really thinks he is not aware of his own actions. He deduces that among those millions lost were the people of Berkel's hometown, and that the hero is only there out of a personal grudge. Provoking the leader directly, the villain questions if he was wrong about the true intentions hiding behind that shiny armor. But Berkel lowers the tip of his weapon into the snow and reveals that he came all this way for one single, strong reason. He states with absolute conviction that he is fighting solely for the bright future of the children. Hearing such a pure answer, the necromancer is left completely speechless and frozen. Berkel explains that he needs to leave behind his own choices, beliefs, and hopes so the next generation can live in peace. Archimonde simply watches his own hate-corrupted reflection staring back at him in his opponent's eyes, while the eyes of a true and unwavering knight reflected directly back into his. At that exact moment, the dark clouds part in the sky, and a warm ray of sunshine lights up the battlefield. The mech realizes just how different Berkel is from him, fighting for the sake of the next generation and his own descendants. Out of gas, to keep clashing against such a noble ideal, the necromancer drops to his knees in the freezing snow. Accepting his final fate, he simply lowers his head and tells the knight to deliver the final blow. However, the hero tosses the legendary holy sword to the ground. Instead of using the divine weapon, Berkel draws a shadowy blade from his belt to finish off the necromancer. Pointing the dark steel at his enemy's neck, he asks if the necromancer has any last words before clocking out. With an air of mystery, Archimonde offers a faint smile and warns that the masters of the underworld do not fade away quite so easily. With that, the hero takes him down as the Mick promises to make a comeback someday. The strike is clean and fast, separating the May's head from his body. All of this done using a shadowy blade. All the knights around them start cheering and celebrating wildly over Archimonde's definitive downfall. Even after the final strike, the necromancer's consciousness still hears the sound of his own head hitting the ground in the middle of the massive celebration. The sound of humanity's roaring victory slowly turns into a distant, muffled echo in his mind. That historic moment marked the true end of the 10-year war and the absolute downfall of the continent's Dark Lord, completely sealing Archimonde's end in the world's history books. Just then, a heavy storm starts pouring out of nowhere. The heavy rain hammers the roof of a massive, luxurious mansion isolated in the dead of night. Inside, two maids get super excited when they notice the young master's lips finally moving in his crib. One of them steps closer out of curiosity to get a better look, trying to figure out if the child is actually waking up. Archimonde's consciousness wakes up completely confused in that giant room. Right as the maid wishes young master, Klein, a good morning, she happily points to a portrait of a beautiful woman in the mirror, explaining that she is the Duchess and also his loving mother. The woman tries to encourage the baby to say the word mom, but the Mac can only feel his body being extremely heavy and sluggish. The maids keep playfully insisting with a lot of affection, and the baby starts babbling his first syllables, his little face trembling. They are absolutely shocked, amazed that the child is already managing to pronounce his first sound so early. But to everyone's panic, the baby starts screaming, summoning his dark guardians and cursed soldiers in the name of Archimonde. The child orders the evil forces to obey his royal commands, making the staff drop their toys in pure terror. Coincidence or not, a creepy lightning bolt tears through the sky outside the mansion right at the exact moment of the chilling summon. Thunder violently crashes, lighting up the main courtyard statue, scaring the living daylights out of everyone on the property. 15 long years fly by. Since that bizarre day, the family's young heir was born. In the mansion's lavish hallway, a group of maids swoon and gossip excitedly after seeing a very charming guy walk by. They are completely melting and starstruck just checking out his face and his gorgeous white hair from behind. Klein is now a super stylish teenager, considered by all the staff to be a true, untouchable masterpiece crafted by the heavens. He strolls down the halls rocking a flawless look, but with the eyes of someone who is deeply bored with life. The women keep gossiping in the corners of the hall, wondering what on earth he eats every day to look so breathtaking. Suddenly, the Mac turns his head with a sharp glare, realizing he has finally spotted the target he was looking for. Without any warning, a whole bucket of cold water is brutally thrown right at his face. The cheap shot came from a furious old man holding the empty bucket, who quickly orders the evil spirit to beat it forever. Father Garrison Bierkman tenses up, swearing the kid had the exact same wicked look as the old Archimonde just a second ago. Grabbing the soaked teen's head, the clergyman announces the purification was a success, even though 3 people had already been spellbound around there. Dripping water everywhere, Klein complains about the old man's knack for spewing so much nonsense in a row, and asks if he ever gets tired of this clown show of a ritual. The priest fiercely defends that it is no clown show, since Archimonde's dark soul still lives inside the boy's body and needs to be cleansed. Klein boldly denies being the reincarnated necromancer, but the old guy grabs a spray bottle and spritzes more holy water in his face, claiming he saw the evil resurface. Klein gets ticked off and asks if the priest has actually lost his marbles. With that, the boy turns to leave while repeatedly calling the old guy a crazy old coot. But Garrison does not let it slide and orders the guards to grab the teen right away. Out of options, the mech runs in his birthday suit across the castle courtyard, shouting his own name, furious at being treated like that by a lunatic. Dunked in holy water, he reflects that he definitely did not see this coming, since he was absolutely sure he had met his end in the past. Looking back at his own birth, the guy realizes he ended up being treated like a monster and locked away in a monastery at 3 years old, all because of that childish summoning, which forced him to endure a bunch of harsh treatments over time, always being closely watched by the ruthless figure of the priest at all times. The old man glares down at the kid, calling him Archimonde before sarcastically correcting himself to young Master Klein. Ever since he was a baby, the Make had to put up with the clergyman reciting purification prayers for 24 hours straight next to his crib, not to mention being forced to take freezing garlic-filled baths while listening to the same repetitive chants. He was even tied to a cross and exposed to holy fire in the name of these crazy rituals. The despair was so intense that the kid's cries for help echoed throughout the entire church. Now, 5 years after being released, the young master is shown sitting on the floor wearing a little party hat, looking bored out of his mind. His personal maid, Aaron, claps her hands together and prays devotedly that he grows up healthy and brings honor to the family of heroes. Hearing all that Holy Spirit mumbo-jumbo, the guy just rolls his eyes with zero patience left. Annoyed, he snatches the hat off his head and slams it on the floor, telling the girl to knock it off. Aaron looks visibly bummed out and mentions she handmade the decoration with a lot of love, making the master freeze right in his tracks. Instant regret kicking in, the teen apologizes for being so harsh and admits he acted in the heat of the moment. With that, he quickly bends down to pick the item up from the floor, blaming his constant stress on dealing with Garrison. Carefully holding the crumpled hat, the Mick tries to smooth over the awkward situation. But the peace does not last long, as the clergyman's booming voice soon echoes, calling out for the heir. The priest wipes away a fake tear, claiming to be touched seeing the kid wear the gift he spent a whole week knitting. In a split second, Klein mercilessly crushes the decoration and announces he is not wearing that piece of junk. No way. The clergyman flips out, pointing out that the evil soul has awakened again, while the guy tells the old nuisance to give him back his peace of mind. At that moment, the commander of the knights, Dunkel, walks into the room, takes a bow, and asks if the daily ritual is finally over. He casually drops that the rumors of the kid being the Dark Lord's reincarnation have been floating around for over 10 years now. While the teen angrily pinches the old man's cheek, the knight points out that even the church has already declared the heir to be a totally normal person. Instantly changing his tune, Garrison agrees with the soldier and tosses the mech to the ground like he weighs nothing. Laughing out loud, the old man promises to handle the paperwork, while Klein, stuck on the floor, grumbles about the phony acting like a saint in front of others. Lying there, the kid realizes the priest knows exactly how to kiss up to the right people. Before fully leaving, the clergyman stops at the doorframe and shoots a sharp glare back. The man issues a threatening reminder that the surveillance stays strong, since there is always a chance the fiend is actually in there. Warning delivered, he finally turns his back and gets back to walking out of the hall, but not before mockingly reminding him that the next ritual is on Friday, telling the kid to scrub up well while receiving some choice words in return. The priest signs off, chuckling down the hallways, leaving the mech fuming with anger behind him. Exhausted by the daily harassment, the teen flops down onto the room's armchair however he can. Outraged, he questions out loud how an alleged healer is allowed to put people through such absurd torment. Aaron agrees that the clergyman looks more like a muscle-bound monster, but quickly asks in an innocent tone if the master is not actually the ancient necromancer. The guy denies it instantly with a forced smile, swearing he cannot stand hearing that cursed name anymore. On the inside, he knows that if he confesses the truth, he will face brand new forms of torment, especially since he barely just got control of his own body back. Ever since he was reborn, the Mac lived under constant watch and lost 7 long years locked away in an isolated monastery. Frustrated, he vents that he expected some peace coming back to the mansion, but the knight points out that Garrison holds the title of Exarch. Curious about the unusual term, the maid steps closer, wanting to know if that position is really all that big of a deal. The commander takes a short pause, setting the stage to explain the true influence of that annoying old man. Uncle seriously explains that it is a highly respected title given only to the strongest person in the entire church. He makes it clear that warriors at this level possess overwhelming power, making them impossible to control by anyone other than the Duke himself. The girl is blown away and figures the young man's family must be incredible, while the Mac raises his finger, wanting to ask another question. Giving Aaron a light pat on the head, he wants to find out right away who the most powerful leader across all generations was. The knight thinks for a second and praises the current head of the family, but the guy quickly cuts him off, guessing it was the very first one. Surprised by the quick answer, Dunkel tries to defend the 7th Duke again, but gets shut down immediately. With a firm, confident gaze, Klein states that the original patriarch will always be the most formidable warrior of the bloodline. Faced with such conviction, the commander just watches the boy in silence for a few moments. Giving in to the argument, he figures the heir simply admires the founder a little too much, and the maid eagerly agrees. McLean's back in the armchair, staring at a painting on the wall, quietly denying any kind of soft spot for the man from the past. With that, the soldier smiles nostalgically, recalling that it has been 200 years since that hero established the renowned family. Hearing the exact time frame, the young man just locks his eyes on the fancy portrait, digesting the sheer weight of all that time. Driven by bad blood, he grits his teeth, admitting to himself that the irony of this whole situation is still tough to swallow. After all, the vast line of nobles that defended that territory for centuries hides a bitter secret at its roots. The very top of this family tree happens to be occupied by the exact man responsible for bringing the great ancient war to a close. That brilliant man painted on the canvas is the legendary knight commander, Berkel Rhineland, the very hero responsible for taking down the Dark Lord, only to have him reincarnate right into his own bloodline. The painful memories of that final moment in the snowy fields are still alive and burning bright inside Klein's mind. The unwavering face of the opponent, who rejected the divine sword, remains a constant nightmare, especially when recalling the final strike delivered in the name of a peaceful future for the continent's next generations. The brutal impact of the shadowy blade finishing him off forever marked the end of that long and brutal conflict. Startled by the nightmare, the young man wakes up with a jump, gasping for air in the dead of night. Breaking into a cold sweat, he tries to steady his heavy breathing as the dim light outlines the furniture in his room. wiping his tired face. The guy curses the awful dream and remembers the terrifying title he used to carry. Back then, blind fury turned him into a monster capable of wiping out entire kingdoms with his immortal army. But all that destruction did not stop his life from coming to a tragic end at the steady hands of the Northern Knight. The teen pulls at his white hair, complaining that he will never get used to this body housing so many dark memories. To his complete surprise, the priest's deep voice echoes from the doorway, commenting on how the kid is sleep-talking again. With a dangerous, suspicious glare, the old man directly asks if the heir was dreaming about his necromancer days. Knowing the fatal risk he was taking, Klein plays it cool by tightly hugging his maid, pretending to just be an exhausted child. The maid hears the old man's comment and gets defensive, blaming the guy for talking in his sleep. The priest fantasizes about the master giving orders to crush the continent like Archimonde, while Klein tells the girl to zip it. Right then, Berkman the butler knocks on the door, announcing that the sword demonstration is starting soon. Engulfed in an intimidating aura, Garrison declares that the heir will need to receive double the purification sessions. The mech simply covers Aaron's mouth, completely annoyed by the situation he has been dragged into. Once outside, he curses the crazy priest and mentally demands they stop messing with his peace. Walking down the halls, the teen asks the butler about this so-called sword demonstration. Berkman confirms the event, explaining that the Duke specifically requested the young master's attendance this time. Klein is surprised to learn that his own father actually wants him there, while Aaron discreetly offers him a snack. The butler spots the interaction and scolds the girl for being rude, but the guy quickly steps up to defend his friend. Watching the maid happily munching away, the Mech points out that she is clearly enjoying the setup. Changing the subject, Klein thinks it is weird he got called down, since his dad never seemed to care if he was at these events or not. That is when Berkman reveals that the Branch family came over for a visit. The young master repeats the term thoughtfully, trying to figure out the real reason for this sudden gathering. Arriving at the hall, he immediately notices the troublemaking group, who also catch his entrance right on cue. From across the room, someone mocks the guy, telling the others to call him by the old Dark Lord's name. Two cousins from his dad's side keep the teasing going, asking if he has any fun stories from rotting in the monastery for 7 years. The heir also notices some distant relatives from the Northern Branch stuffing their faces with terrible manners. On top of catching the silhouettes of the Western Branch members scattered around the room looking a bit too relaxed, where one of the women stands out, sitting with loads of confidence and giving off a real air of superiority. Klein walks right past them, ignoring the jokes, considering them all just trash in the Rhineland bloodline. The nobles get ticked off by the kid's snobby attitude and immediately demand respect, shooting daggers at him. One of the guys yells that his family is talking to him, but the Mick mentally scoffs at that title. He admits he does not remember anyone's name in there, and knows they are only barking so loud because the main house is losing its touch. The fact that they can openly ignore a direct hair like that says everything about the current pecking order around here. Suddenly, the clash of steel draws everyone's attention to two teens sparring intensely in the middle of the hall. Backed into a corner, one of the fighters curses at his opponent, calling the guy by the name of Deline. Pressing the offensive, Deline tells his opponent to stop underestimating the fight and draw his weapons properly. Giving no room to block, he lands several hits on Dalton, who uselessly tries to call the match off. Showing off some serious skill, that kid carries the heavy burden of being the entire family's last remaining hope. Klein recognizes the fighter as his older half-brother, the great Prodigy genius, Deline Rhineland. He knows the house's reputation as master swordsman is only kept alive thanks to that young man's ridiculous talent. Charging in full force, Deline announces that things are going to be very different this time around. The Mug watches closely, as this is the first time he has seen the family's technique since he reincarnated. The Prodigy delivers a fast, unhesitating horizontal slash against his opponent's wooden weapon, and follows it straight up with a heavy vertical strike, putting even more pressure on Dalton's defensive stance. Focusing his power, the half-brother leaps high into the air, wrapping his blade in an intense, violent yellow aura. Using his sharp perception, Klein tracks every single detail of the mid-air movement with his eyes gleaming. The necromancer flawlessly reads the footwork, the exact timing of the jump, and the kid's energy flow. Dalton spots the incoming danger and is absolutely terrified by the brutal force of the strike headed his way. Just by analyzing the mana, the heir recognizes the Rhineland house's secret art being executed flawlessly. Showing no mercy, Deline comes crashing down, tearing through the air, and hits the ground with the devastating impact of the famous meteor sword. With the dust settling and the floor shattered, the sparring match finally comes to a close. The Prodigy glances proudly over his shoulder, reminding him he already warned him about who was going to be in trouble. The surrounding nobles are shell-shocked to see such an advanced, complex technique being busted out in front of everyone. The Mick figures the move was a warning that the main family is still a powerhouse, all while rubbing his eyes in annoyance. Just then, an upbeat voice rings out under the hall's crystal chandeliers, calling him by name. Deline walks over with a friendly vibe, asking how long his brother had been hiding out in the back. Flashing a genuine smile, he admits he would have gone a lot harder in practice if he knew his little brother was watching. Sizing up that perfect, charismatic posture, Klein deduces that the branch families only showed up for one specific reason. He is totally sure the gold-digging group is just here to try and squeeze more money out of the main house again. Cutting the chat short, the seventh leader of the house walks up, praising his firstborn for mastering such a complex technique. The Prodigy immediately gives a very respectful bow to Heinkel Rhineland, the head of the clan. Also being the necromancer's biological father, the man acknowledges the grueling effort his oldest son carries on his shoulders. The Mig just watches the scene quietly, knowing that talented kid is the very last source of pride the Duke has left. Heinkel hypes up the strike's precision, stating that no knight at that age would dare attempt something so draining. Ling gets a little embarrassed by all the praise in front of the family, insisting he still has a long way to go. The patriarch brings up the final words of the great hero Burkle, demanding that they always remain the finest knights in the empire. Placing a firm hand on the heir's shoulder, the man tells him to carve those words into his heart and keep moving forward. Right after that, the leader completely shifts gears and catches Klein's attention with a much fainter smile. The teen gulps and clenches his jaw, already bracing for a massive scolding in front of all the guests. But his dad simply reaches out a tired arm and gently rests his hand on his head. With an incredibly gloomy tone, the Duke admits he cannot sense a single drop of mana coming from the kid's body. Klein apologizes for failing, fully aware he has already become useless dead weight with zero future prospects with the bloodline. Surprising his son once again, Hinkle asks for forgiveness for leaving him locked up in the monastery during those crucial years. The relatives start disgustedly gossiping in the corners, judging the fact that the second son lacks any magical talent for warfare. While the dad tries to comfort his youngest, the nobles conclude that the direct bloodline has lost its edge and that they need to make a move. Turning his back to the hall, the guy walks down the plush carpet, totally unfazed by the insults aimed at his back. His mind drifts straight back to the dark past, remembering the knight claiming to fight for that generation's future. Clenching his fists tight, the pent-up resentment takes over the former lord's thoughts once again. He furiously questions Burkle's choices, outraged that the hero gave his life to protect scumbags like them. A couple of cousins keep taunting the mace exit from afar, waving goodbye with total mockery. One of them complains about the useless hare who cannot even hold a sword right, making the teen stop in his tracks upon hearing the footsteps. Dalton, the guy who lost his match in a humiliating way, pops up in the hallway calling the youngest a real snobby disgrace. The necromancer stares at the loser with dead, bored eyes, wondering if the guy actually thinks secretly seducing girls is some kind of achievement. Dalton steps up to Klein, asking if the kid thought paying out money would stop the rumors, and questions if he is just naive or plain stupid. Taking heavy steps toward the mech, the noble demands to know where he got that kind of nonsense from. But suddenly, the guy trips over his own feet and faceplants right in the middle of the hallway. Getting up in a rage, he accuses the younger brother of taking out his frustration on him after getting wrecked by Deline, and proceeds to curse him out. The sore loser keeps egging him on, calling Klein a punk who does not even know who his own mom is. Hearing the insult, the young lord stops walking and asks in a chilling tone what the other guy just said. Faced with that sudden, terrifying aura, Dalton completely freezes up and starts breaking into a cold sweat out of pure dread. Klein knows his irritation is not about a mother he does not even know, but rather about all that unwarranted disrespect. With an intense, glowing stare, he asks himself internally how this family managed to fall so ridiculously low. After all, it makes zero sense that the bloodline of the exact hero who took him down in the past could turn into something this pathetic. In that tense moment, Dunkel shows up in the hallway, telling the guy on the floor to knock it off. Wearing a strict expression, the commander makes it crystal clear that he will not tolerate a single drop of disrespect anymore. Pressured by the soldier's authority, Dalton clicks his tongue, totally frustrated and out of options. Turning his back to leave, the coward tells Klein to consider himself lucky he got bailed out by the knight. Watching the trash walk away, Dunkel grips his own sword hilt, ready to throw down if it came to it. The mech keeps his cool and just watches the situation unfold quietly. He then calls out to the soldier and calmly asks if the man has a spare sword lying around. Later that night, The two head over to a more secluded area in the mansion's training grounds. Dunkel hands a basic training weapon over to the young master. The knight asks why the kid would need gear like that this late at night. Testing the blade's weight, Klein just asks if this was how DeLine swung his weapon earlier during the showcase. Confirming it is the meteor technique. The kid asks the commander to step out of the way because he has something to test out. Walking back, the soldier sadly thinks that the heir has not given up on fighting, but that it is just too late for a body with 0 mana. He reflects that someone with no magic aptitude will never make it as a knight, much less using a technique created by the Duke himself. The man concludes that even if someone mimicked the moves perfectly, recreating the actual strike would be impossible. Alone on the field, the young lord sharpens his gaze, admitting that the scene from earlier is still weirdly vivid in his mind. He can remember the exact footwork of his older brother with absolute perfection, having the precise timing of the liftoff from the ground and the entire violent trajectory carved by the blade midair. The former necromancer can even visualize the intense mana flow used during the attack, channeling his own energy. The kid's eyes glow a deep purple right in the middle of the darkness. Sensing the impact from afar, Dunkel stops walking right away and spins around, totally freaked out. Sweat drips down the commander's face as he recognizes the sheer weight of that sudden surge of energy. Eyes wide with shock, he refuses to believe the absurd possibility crossing his mind. A massive pillar of purple lightning violently strikes the ground, flawlessly recreating the raw power of the family's signature attack. Amidst the energy chaos, the maze's vision adjusts as he processes what he just pulled off. The teen stays standing right in the epicenter of the impact, wrapped in thick smoke and that terrifying aura. The soldier watches the dust settle from a distance, spotting the heir's silhouette among the completely shattered rocks. Still shell-shocked, Dunkel slowly approaches and calls out to the young master, trying to figure out what just happened. Panting and sweaty, Klein looks back and wonders, visibly impressed, how that move actually ended up working. The next morning, Aaron hides behind a piece of furniture, watching the scary scene unfolding right in front of her. Father Garrison stares at the situation with a face drenched in sweat and a look of pure disbelief. The old guy mutters that it is impossible while the garlic-filled holy water boils non-stop in the cauldron. He points at the kid sunk in the tank, proudly announcing that the boy has been holding his breath for over a minute now. Reaching his absolute limit, Klein bursts out of the water, gasping desperately for air, and angrily yells to ask if the next ritual is going to be inside a fish tank. Now out of the tub, he complains about the extra time, while the priest laughs, mentioning he felt a super sketchy energy coming from his room. Getting toweled off by the maid, the Mick grumbles that the old monster just loves tormenting him using bogus excuses. The brief moment of peace ends when Dunkel steps up, handing over an invitation letter sent by the cowardly noble. Drying his hair, the youngest brother finds out that Dalton wants to apologize for the whole embarrassing scene at the training grounds. Knowing the sore loser's temper, Klein finds it super hard to believe that Trash is actually apologizing out of the goodness of his heart. He calmly analyzes the contents of the fancy paper to figure out what the real trap is. The kid thinks it is incredibly sketchy to get an invite for a hunting competition right after that ridiculous stunt. Squinting his eyes, he easily pieces together that his snobby cousin just needed a cheap excuse to drag him out of the mansion. The commander asks if he plans on going, and the teen calmly replies that there is no reason to turn down the offer. Shooting a side-eye full of confidence, the young lord guarantees he has no reason to be scared of that arrogant jerk. After all, the plain training sword leaning against the wall is living proof. He holds a major ace up his sleeve now. Mentally replaying the moves, he remembers perfectly duplicating DeLine's advanced technique. It was exactly at the moment of that devastating impact that he realized something crucial about his new body. Even without fully understanding why, the kid figured out he can flawlessly copy any skill just by watching it once. Dunkel listens to the heir's explanation and watches him quietly for a second, wrapping his head around the sheer absurdity of it. Trusting the young man's vibe, the soldier backs his decision and lets him know he will get the carriage ready for the event. The monster priest butts into the trip plans, offering to tag along, while the maid tries to shield her master from the old guy's craziness. With a deadpan look, the kid listens to the clergyman bring up his warning from earlier. Wrapped in a dark aura, Garrison repeats that he is sensing a heavy, sinister energy hanging in the air today. Shortly after, the luxury carriage rolls out of the castle gates and makes its way down the long dirt road through the forest. The wooden wheels bounce wildly over the potholes, making the teen suffer in the back seat. Completely carsick, Klein holds his stomach, nearly throwing up right in front of his maid and the beefy healer. The priest hands over a red pillow, pointing out that this is exactly why he tried to stop the kid from coming. The ex-necromancer waves off the offer, listening to the man explain that the western forest terrain is way too rough for beginners. Garrison advises the boy to try and catch some sleep to shake off the awful motion sickness. Joking around, the old man decides to pass the pillow to Aaron instead, prompting the annoyed kid to ask if he has lost his mind. Ignoring the silly teasing, the Lord rests his chin on the wooden window frame and watches the endless scenery roll by. Taking in the massive green landscape, the boy mentally notes how drastically this whole territory has changed. Back during the Great War, this exact road was nothing but a frozen graveyard buried in snow and littered with impaled bodies. The teen's gaze darkens as he processes the sheer weight of that 200-year time jump. After all, the transformation of that field of battle into a living forest is the ultimate proof that Burkle's sacrifice actually paid off. Dunkel pops the carriage door open, letting young Master Klein know they have finally arrived. Outside, the Branch family's massive mansion really pops with its extravagant architecture. Eyeing the place from a distance, the kid asks if that is really where his cocky cousin lives. He notices the property is even more over-the-top than the main house, proving they definitely live up to the title of a grand family. Plus, the teen thinks it is a total waste of cash to host a whole hunting competition just for a bunch of kids. Right then, Dalton's voice rings out, calling for the mech calling. The noble walks up pulling massive hunting dogs on their leashes, asking what the youngest is staring at so intensely. Totally full of himself, he brags about the top-tier construction paid for with money squeezed out of the clan's leadership. The guy keeps throwing shade, saying that someone locked up in a monastery for 7 years does not have a clue how the real world works. Brushing off the insult, Klein notices the dogs are looking skinny and asks since when a hunt turned into a chat session. Laughing at the comeback, his rival calls him an impatient punk and claims he came ready to go. He snaps his fingers in the air and tells his cousin to watch closely. Instantly, the furious dogs take off sprinting while the noble announces the competition has officially started. Dalton explains he let a bunch of prey loose all over the mountain just for the event. Trying to sound smart, he points out that a starving dog's sense of smell is 100,000 times stronger than a regular human's. Winding up his crossbow, the cousin explains that the targets bolt the second the dogs start chasing their scent. Wasting no time, he fires the weapon with deadly precision at a faraway target. The arrows strike the fierce beasts right in the middle of the hunting pack with full force. The noble celebrates his perfect aim, letting out a loud, insanely arrogant laugh. In that moment of pure distraction, he turns his head and catches sight of Aaron's shy presence right behind them. Resting his hand on the girl's head, he mentions he recognizes the maid the former lord is always dragging around. Full of bad intentions, he steps closer, calling the girl over to give her a very different kind of job. But before he could even try anything, his hand is grabbed with serious force. Startled by the sudden move, Dalton tries to process what is happening while getting a direct order to let her go. Staring down the coward with absolute ice in his eyes, Klein warns him to get his hands off the girl before he ends up breaking his arm. Feeling the heat, the heir of the Branch family pulls his arm back, letting out a nervous chuckle while breaking into a cold sweat from the tension. Trying to hide his nerves, he gets on his horse, complaining about the Mee's arrogant attitude. In a rush, he quickly adjusts his boot in the animal's saddle, getting ready to head deep into the woods. Already mounted, the boy opens his arms in a very teasing way, calling for the youngest to follow him. On the other side, the master asks Dunkel to stay with the maid, as it is too risky to leave her alone in a place like that. Worried about the situation, the knight insists on tagging along while handing over a magical flare scroll. The single-use item works entirely without mana and sends out an instant alert as soon as the paper is torn. Klein pockets the item, noticing the soldier's strong suspicion that something terrible might happen along the way. Showing a glowing mark on his hand, the boy tells the commander to tear his own scroll if that coward happens to vanish from sight. Trusting part of the plan to his subordinate, the young lord dashes off on his horse toward the isolated area. Uncle simply stays behind, watching his master ride away in complete silence. A short while later, the late afternoon sets in, and the sky starts to get really dark over the mountainous region. Riding along the dirt trail, the young man figures that his cousin could not have gone very far if he took that path. Suddenly, he stops his horse upon being surprised by a familiar voice coming straight out of the dark. Holding a sharp blade next to a fallen animal, Dalton appears, complaining about the youngest taking way too long. With a completely calm expression, the Mee calmly asks what that fool is trying to pull off out there. However, the former necromancer's gaze soon shifts when he spots a very weird detail on the forest floor. One of the noble's own hunting dogs is lying there completely lifeless and covered in crimson in the middle of the brush, pointing his weapon threateningly. The enemy declares that this is the grand finale of the day's competition. Overflowing with fury in his eyes, Dalton yells without a second thought that the final prey he plans to hunt down is his own cousin. The mech just repeats the threat out of pure boredom, listening to the coward say he is going to take his head to show off to his older brother. Dalton continues his angry rant, calling the main family an empty and ridiculous shell, completely lacking power or any morals. Making a quick hand sign, the boy warns that the useless guy will not even have the chance to fight for his own survival now. Several hooded assassins emerge from the shadows drawing swords, while the traitor claims that the dukedom already belongs to his branch. Highly skilled archers positioned in the trees aim their arrows at the boy, completely sealing off any chance of escape. Surrounded on all sides in a fatal trap, the former lord simply turns his face and agrees with the statement like it is no big deal. Sure of his upcoming win, the enemy gets totally delusional, imagining the next day's gossip about the embarrassing downfall of the great northern house. He gets even more hyped up by his wicked glory, mocking that people will say the young man passed away, becoming dog food. Immediately, the memory of the legendary hero Burkle comes to Klein's mind, recalling the speech about fighting for the future of the kids. Faced with that extremely pathetic situation, the mech cannot hold back and lets out a little mocking chuckle. The short chuckle quickly turns into a hysterical laugh as he hides his face in complete disbelief. Not understanding a thing about that bizarre reaction, the cousin steps back a bit and asks in panic if the outcast has finally lost his mind. Cutting the laughing fit short right then and there, Klein lowers his hand and shifts his tone of voice to something much darker and heavier. Staring the boy down with intense red eyes, he calls him a reckless kid who just crossed every single line. The overwhelming weight of that menacing aura makes the noble freeze in place instantly, his face dripping with cold sweat and pure panic. Exuding pure hostile intent, the young man reminds him that this family was built through his own sacrifice, and now this piece of trash is ruining it. A massive, dense dark energy starts to spiral around the boy's body, creating a violent whirlwind across the field. With the sky turning a bizarrely dark shade, the enemy backs away stuttering about him having no mana, only to get the reply that this is not magic. Engulfed in crushing and imposing bluish flames, the former master of the underworld reveals that he is using pure demonic energy. The mercenaries try to shield themselves from the brutal gale, totally terrified and having no clue what is going on there. Processing the info little by little, the coward's face turns pale as he realizes the massive weight of the term he just heard. Taking advantage of the growing despair, the Mac begins to recite an ancient summoning for the evil spirits buried by time. Floating slightly above the ground, he raises his arms commanding the souls to rise and serve once again under his command. A massive torrent of spectral skulls bursts from the earth in a scary way, while his voice echoes ordering them to devour everything. The unstoppable wave of hungry phantoms immediately spreads through the entire forest, thirsty for destruction and absolute ruin. Watching his worst nightmare come to life right in front of him, Dalton screams in despair as a terrifying suspicion hits his mind. A giant army of skeletons breaks through the soil under the fatal orders, while the traitor whispers the ancient name of the Lord of Darkness. Enjoying the symphony of pure despair and horror up close, Klein stretches his hand forward and condemns everyone present to total wipeout. Amidst the deep chaos taking over the area, the boy's inner conscience admits that he actually thought he had forgotten about this side of him. But, surrounded by all that trail of unholy ruin, the Lord reaffirms that his essence as the demon of the continent was never really asleep. The May's voice echoes in his mind, remembering the 200 long years he spent trapped in an endless loop of boring days. But he admits that he can still feel all of it echoing endlessly in the depths of the darkness. The boy notices the voices of the fallen calling out to him and just rolls with the macabre situation. He describes that feeling flowing through his body like a nostalgic resonance, bringing old memories back to the surface. Overcome by this familiar wave, the master of the underworld fully embraces the absurd strength waking up inside him. Totally terrified, Dalton screams in despair, saying that there is no way this is actually happening. Seeing the dark skeletons rising, the coward steps back paralyzed with fear as he pronounces the ancient lord's name with a shaky voice. With a gaze full of malice, Klein confirms that this was the title they used to call him back in the day. The mercenaries around them are shocked, wondering if that terrifying legend was nothing more than just a rumor. The group's shock grows even more when one of them notices the bizarre army that just emerged from the shadows. one of the creepy skeletons locks its fatal gaze on the men, muttering the direct order to wipe everyone out. Faced with the unholy threat, the team of soldiers stands frozen in pure silence waiting for the first move. Trying to play off the panic, one of the henchmen lets out a forced laugh, making fun of that bunch of old bones in front of them. Hearing the enemies call the fallen useless trash, the Mac lowers his head thinking about the insult. Gaining some fake confidence, the group brags about having already destroyed hundreds of creatures like that on other regular missions. Completely ignoring the danger, the traitor decides they are going to take their heads as souvenirs at the end of the brawl. Right away, the noble gives the order to quickly eliminate the monsters blocking the main path. Following the boss's command, the rest of the group actively gears up to clear a path through the forest. The long-range units load their weapons, focusing their attack on the isolated youngest kid in the open field. The tense sound of crossbows being drawn echoes through the air, revealing the brutality of the incoming shot. Without wasting another second, the commander of the enemy troops yells out the order to open fire on the target. A dense shower of arrows cuts through the dark air, raining down at top speed toward the boy. The lethal bombardment goes full force at the apparently defenseless lord in the middle of the brush. But, facing certain doom, the young man keeps a totally calm and unfazed look in the face of destruction. The projectiles crash into an invisible barrier, being violently deflected before even touching him. Thinking he won the battle, the cousin mocks him, imagining the outcast turned into a crimson pincushion. However, the smile wipes right off the traitor's face when he realizes something incredibly wrong just happened. The dust settles, revealing that the storm of shots got caught in the bodies of the undead troop. An impenetrable wall of monsters holding their weapons protected the master with absolute perfection from all sides. Looking at the defense, the necromancer sighs that 200 years made people forget the true power of his creations. Mercenaries go into full-blown panic when they notice the enemies formed a blockade line in the blink of an eye. Playing it cool, the boy warns that he would understand their mental confusion if those creatures were just the regular versions. Full of pure malice, he makes sure to make it crystal clear that his personal army operates in a very different way. The coward freezes in fear while the Lord tells the spirit of the great hero Burkle to watch the show that is about to start. With just one quick command, the first unit breaks its defensive stance and charges forward in brutal sync. He declares that he is going to make the people who are disrespecting the future, the North fought so hard for, pay a very steep price. Clenching his fist, the young man leads the charge, ordering the troops to crush the traitors without any mercy. The unholy horde fiercely jumps at the men, wielding their worn-out blades with extreme violence. Seeing their unreal movement speed, the noble freaks out, asking since when bones are able to run. An overwhelming tide of the undead invades the terrain, letting out terrifying screams during their unstoppable advance. The mercenary leader tries to contain the chaos, demanding everyone to hold a tight formation against the threat. But the warning is useless when one of the soldiers gets brutally pierced by a sword. In a matter of seconds, the shadowy blades slice through the archers, splashing crimson across the trees. Cornered with no clear way out, Dalton just curses his luck while watching his group get completely wiped out. In the midst of despair, the traitor begs the second line of shooters to surround the area before they all fall. Just then, one of the skeletons focuses its spectral vision on the trees, marking the exact position of the new targets in the dark. The creepy unit silently readies their crossbows, waiting for the perfect moment to counterattack. Upon noticing that the summons have long-range weapons, the mercenaries abandon their posts and run for their lives. Watching the pathetic retreat, the former master simply utters the fatal execution command. A violent storm of sharp darts tears through the wind, heading straight for the scared men. With zero real chance of defending themselves, the shooters are hit, dropping to the muddy ground. Screams of pain pierce the silence of the forest as the punctured bodies collapse into the shadows. In close quarters combat, the heavy beatdown continues, with the monsters breaking the human resistance into pieces. In absolute panic, the cousin admits that the strength of those creatures makes zero sense, and soon everyone is going to meet their maker right there. Taking the front line for the final stand, he draws his own sword and tells the survivors to focus on close combat. The young man rants furiously, demanding the last few goons to follow his desperate orders. Finding a gap in the attack, he lunges at the nearest monster wielding his heavy blade. Filled with bottled-up rage, the noble delivers a side slash, aiming for the weak spot of the cursed beast. The heavy impact lands perfectly, taking off the creature's skeletal skull completely clean. Celebrating the quick win, he bursts out laughing, bragging about having exploited the obvious weakness by aiming for the head. However, his joy vanishes when the freakish thing brutally attacks using its sword even after losing its head. Jumping back in shock, The traitor is stunned, unable to understand how the body keeps moving so aggressively after that hit. Watching from afar, the boy smirks, reminding the useless guy that he had already given a heads up about the true nature of his troops. Right in front of the coward, the bone monster crouches down to pick up its own fallen head from the dirt. In a bizarrely smooth move, the creature simply snaps the top part right back onto the base of its neck. The sickening sight completely breaks Dalton's mind, leaving him paralyzed in a state of pure existential shock. Showing no mercy in his humiliation, the myth confirms that spirits summoned with demonic energy never go down that easily. The monster roars, ready for round 2, proving exactly why the leading necromancer managed to devastate the world in the past using advanced tactics. Physically drained, the remaining mercenaries stare straight at hell on earth with absolutely zero hope of escaping. The indestructible horde keeps up its synchronized advance, while the group tries to wrap their heads around the army's surreal immortality. Keeping a calm face, Klein reflects that his current body has a low limit and can only sustain those 11 active summons. Focusing back on the main beatdown, he coldly asks if they should extend the punishment. Suddenly, the loud sound of branches rustling echoes through the dark trees, putting a pause on the heavy tension. Far away from the mountain covered in ruin, a warm and innocent laugh fills the brightly lit garden of the family mansion. Sitting comfortably, the young Aaron listens to the monster priest spilling lively gossip about the master back in his monastery days. Finding the priest's story super amusing, Aaron laughs and mentions that just picturing the scene is already hilarious to her. Noticing the girl's excitement, Garrison points out how much she really seems to like the young master. Without hesitating for a single second, she chews on a sweet and happily agrees with the statement. Meanwhile, in the middle of the dark forest, one of Dalton's goons begs the undead for mercy. Panting and surrounded by the immortal horde, the man backs away, consumed by the panic of becoming the next victim. Back to the cozy chat, the maid keeps praising Klein, claiming that he is super sweet. At that exact moment, a dark blade slices through the air, striking the enemies with extreme brutality out in the woods. Totally clueless about the massacre, Aaron highlights that the master is the most affectionate person in the whole world. Far from there, the boy extends his hand coldly while the traitor's essence splatters across his face. Obeying the extermination orders, the skeletons crush and pierce the goons, showing zero pity. In the midst of the absolute chaos, Dalton tries desperately to fend off the intense attacks from the creatures, but he ends up taking a quick hit that sends him flying while he curses the frustrating situation. Trying to recover from the impact, he notices a shadow closing in fast from the side. Annoyed by the bone monster's resilience, the noble promises he is going to stop their regeneration. Right then, he spots the Lord's lonely silhouette in the mist and locks his target straight on him. Knowing it is his only shot at survival, Dalton runs frantically, ignoring the monsters all around him. He jumps with full force right at the Mi's back, aiming for a perfectly clean surprise attack. The traitor screams with hatred that this ridiculous joke with the fallen is going to end right there. Blinded completely by rage, the coward charges with his blade, swearing the summons will disappear. However, the former lord's eye glows a deep purple as he senses the fast approach behind him. Without showing an ounce of surprise, the young man states coldly that he can read every single move. Channeling the dark power of his vision, he draws his sword, releasing an overwhelming electric energy. Lean's image flashes in his mind as he replicates the exact strike he saw his older brother use. Shocked, the cousin recognizes the main family's secret technique even before the final blow lands. Klein leaps, unleashing the devastating meteor sword wrapped in purplish flames right at the enemy. The brutal impact tears through Dalton's body, leaving the noble with no idea what just hit him. With a merciless glare, the Lord declares that the real punishment has just begun and his end will not be easy. Coughing up a puddle of crimson, the traitor falls to his knees, feeling his life slip away rapidly. Back in the day, taking down the mage actually dispelled the creations, and that was exactly how Archimonde ended up falling. But an ironic twist of fate made the former master of the underworld be reborn in a completely different scenario. The boy holds his blade tight, reflecting that it was precisely the Rhineland power that allowed this victory. Staring at the defeated guy, he sarcastically concludes that the enemy's own lineage made him stronger. Down and wounded, Dalton mutters in confusion while the Lord states that he can no longer ignore this duty. The coward tries to ask what the outcast means by all that before passing out completely. His body slumps lifelessly onto the dirt, and the Meg just tells the hero Burkle to wait for what is coming next. Looking at the mess around him, the young man decides that he himself is going to rebuild that ruined house. A short while later, Dalton regains his senses, letting out a groan of pain in a very strange place. Surrounded by pitch black, he tries to figure out where he ended up, since he cannot even see his hand in front of his face. Feeling something cold restricting his moves, the man feels around his arms, getting more anxious by the second. He soon realizes that his wrists are tightly chained up in heavy, thick metal cuffs. Completely locked down in a terrifying iron chair, the traitor lets out an intense noise of sheer confusion. A figure steps out of the shadows, calmly stating that the prisoner has finally woken up from his nap. Showing off his true form from the past, the necromancer reveals that this is the afterlife he created. Little by little, the noble's mind puts the pieces together, and he asks in disbelief if he is in Archimonde's domain. Confirming the hunch, the former lord brings up Dalton's cowardly crimes that he disguised as hunting trips. Annoyed by the lecture, the prisoner demands him to stop talking trash and to let him go right away. However, right in the middle of his fit of rage, the noble's mind processes a crucial piece of info that was missing. The brutal memory of Klein's blade slashing his chest in the middle of the forest flashes back in a dark glimpse. Confused as to why his body is intact, the man hears from the Lord that he has already crossed over and is just here to reap his karma. Going into heavy denial, Dalton yells that this is all nonsense and begs to be freed already. Tuning out the hysterical screams, the master summons a spectral flame and warns that his beliefs do not matter. A massive pack of hellhounds emerges from the darkness, ready to collect the toll for his past sins. The traitor's face goes totally pale as he stares at the monstrous beasts heading his way. Showing zero sympathy, the necromancer just orders the prisoner to listen closely to the noise around him. The dogs charge brutally, tearing into the man to avenge the lives he took in the past. The Lord advises his enemy to engrave that torturous moment while his fate stains the darkness. Chained up and helpless, Dalton lets out an agonizing scream of pure terror as he gets devoured alive by the pack. That endless punishment is just the physical reflection of the cruel nightmare he himself caused innocent people. A single tear rolls down the coward's eye, marking the end of his pointless suffering in that cursed realm. Back in the real world, the transfer drains a lot of energy, leaving Klein panting and visibly wiped out. With silence taking over the wrecked forest, the young man takes a deep breath, checking out the damage from the final clash. Quietly, the skeleton that defended him steps closer, waiting for the Supreme Master's next command. Acknowledging the good work, the Lord holds out his hand and promises to reward the creature's flawless loyalty. The magical energy dissolves the bone warrior, while Klein breaks the heavy curse that tied him down. The dark contract is wrapped up, and the souls gain their promised freedom for helping out with the wipeout. Standing in the middle of the field, he watches the little dots of light float peacefully until they fade into the sky. A gloomy feeling washes over the boy as he thinks about the true nature of the end. The end was supposed to be the moment bones turned to dust, so he wonders what the purpose of him coming back even was. Out of nowhere, a hooded figure pops up, commenting that it is pretty surprising to see the master using necromancy. Scared that the stranger might have seen everything, the Mick tenses up and quickly asks who he is. Controlling a greenish magical sphere in his hand, the newcomer warns that there is no need to reveal that. With a simple wave of his arm, the intruder raises dozens of the fallen from the ground, startling the boy. Driven by a bizarre energy, the mystery mage claims that Klein would not understand the truth anyway. The former lord's eyes widen in absolute shock as he processes the sheer scale of the power that just crashed the area. A massive horde of the undead surrounds the hooded guy, proving that the dark night is still far from over. Watching the bizarre technique, Klein instantly recognizes that the intruder is controlling the fallen through the art of resurrection. Flaunting an arrogant vibe, the mage reveals he is a necromancer and claims the remnants Dalton left behind will still be super useful. An evil laugh echoes across the cold mountain landscape, cranking up the incoming threat. Far from there, in the quiet of the mansion, Aaron excitedly calls Commander Dunkel, asking him to listen to funny stories from the Lord's childhood. Holding a scroll with a tense look, the knight replies dryly that he will listen to the tales some other time. He examines the magical flare scroll, trying to figure out why the boy would use an item meant strictly for major emergencies. Increasing his suspicion even more, the commander notes that it has been 3 hours since they entered the woods, and Dalton's silence brings a terrible gut feeling. Unable to wait any longer, he mounts his horse, determined to go after the young master, but is suddenly cut off. The other knights block the path, warning that ditching his post during the hunting competition would cause a lot of trouble. Annoyed by the interference, Dunkel just glares at the guards, keeping a threatening silence. Spotting the crest stamped on their armor, He recognizes the Cornwell family symbol and realizes those are the traitor's personal guards. Certain that it is a setup, the commander throws his weight around as Klein's personal guardian, threatening to take action if they keep getting in his way. With a fierce glare, he bluntly asks if the mercenaries got the message loud and clear. Pressured by the warrior's crushing aura, the guards gulp hard, lacking the guts to fight back. Turning his face to the confused maid, Dunkel quickly explains that the boy is taking way too long and that he is heading out to search for him. He tells Aaron to head back safely to the mansion with the priest. However, the girl drops the bomb that the Exarch already took off without telling anyone, wearing an extremely serious look on his face. Shock washes over the knight as he remembers the healer followed him there, making that sudden disappearance super sketchy. Cursing the chaotic mess, Dunkel spurs his horse and takes off at full speed toward the dark forest. During the tense ride, he is absolutely certain that all those weird events are not just a mere coincidence. The Guardian charges ahead desperately, fearing the worst is already happening to the family's heir. Far away, the cold mist takes over the battlefield as the army of the fallen finishes standing up. Facing the enemy horde, Klein notices his demonic energy is completely tapped out from the previous fight, and he cannot use his powers. Completely vulnerable, the former lord breathes heavily, feeling the weight of his new body's physical limits. Realizing that the vessel itself is also reaching its breaking point, the hooded intruder orders his macabre troop to attack right away. Under the cowardly mage's direct command, the monsters march relentlessly with the sole mission of wiping out the mech. Getting his fists ready even without mana, the heir mocks the enemy's audacity to think he can beat him using his own dark techniques. The symbol on the back of his hand glows faintly as he forces the last drops of his energy to try and defend himself. An avalanche of rotting remnants and fallen warriors rushes wildly with a thirst for battle against the isolated boy. Confident in his upcoming win, the hostile necromancer declares that the young lord's end has definitely arrived. All of a sudden, the intruder's cocky expression crumbles, shifting to genuine confusion as he notices something weird in the air. An absurdly intense golden flash cuts through the forest's darkness, lighting up the entire battlefield. The beam of holy energy violently strikes the ground, incinerating and dusting the undead in a flash. With his eyes glowing with pure power, Exarch Garrison chants a grim prayer, asking the light to grant eternal peace to the fallen. A colossal pillar of divine power blows up the area, sweeping away the necromantic trash like they are absolutely nothing. Landing heavily on the wrecked ground, the giant priest tells the exhausted boy that he can kick back now. Intimidated by the overwhelming force, the mage takes a step back and cautiously asks about the monstrous man's identity. The healer simply cracks a sadistic, animalistic smile, staring down the heretic who dared to practice dark magic there. Without hiding the pride of his rank, he officially introduces himself as the ultimate authority of the church, ready to cleanse the place. The title of Exarch belongs only to 3 ultimate human weapons who swore to carry out the Pope's absolute orders, being the top combat force. These unique figures are the only ones capable of wielding the sacred weaponry left by the deity. The legend going around the world claims that the brutal strength of just one guy at this level equals the military power of an entire fortress. Back to the clash, the enemy necromancer struggles just to stay on his feet against the invisible pressure radiating from the priest. The holy aura is so dense it shatters the ground around him, creating a whirlwind of rocks and magical dust. Shaking with dread upon realizing the sheer size of that power, the intruder tries to figure out which of those divine monsters is standing in front of him. Watching the scene safely, Klein reflects on the scary track record of that man, who holds the title of the church's strongest physical fighter. Speaking up again with absolute confidence, the muscle-bound monster reassures the boy to chill out under his protection. He takes a heavy step, crushing the remains on the dirty ground as he gears up for the final judgment. In an explosive burst, the Exarch vanishes from sight and pops up right in the middle of the enemy horde, destroying everything in his path. The first brutal punch nails a zombie's skull, shattering the creature before it can even try to react. With smooth and devastating moves, he crushes another freak's chest, turning the cursed body into dust. Channeling the holy light into his fists, Garrison spins his body, launching a golden shockwave while calling out the sinners. Wearing the terrifying look of a merciless executioner, he orders those corrupted souls to beg for forgiveness immediately. Without slowing down his insane pace, the healer grabs 2 monsters by the neck, promising to deliver a true baptism by fire. The blazing energy consumes the creatures of darkness as they scream in agony while their sins are forcefully cleansed. Wrapping up the direct beatdown, the warrior's heavy boot sinks into the dirt, cracking the earth and clearing the dust. A violent sequence of exploding skulls takes over the scene, showcasing the brutal mercy handed out by the priest. Taking the punishment up a notch, he uses a colossal sacred book made of pure light to mercilessly crush the remaining enemies, laying down the law. Completely panicking over the one-sided slaughter, the necromancer cannot wrap his head around why an exarch is in such a remote place. Surrounded by burnt remains, the mage wonders in disbelief how this terrifying level of physical strength can exist in a single human. Realizing he is a goner if he stays there, the intruder turns his back and runs for his life, cursing the massive intel failure in his plan. While running for his life, he tries to process the absurdity of the situation, convincing himself that power display has to be fake. However, desperation takes its toll, and the coward ends up tripping over his own feet, falling hard onto the soft dirt. Before he can even get back up properly, the man feels a massive hand grab his head while the priest sarcastically asks where he thought he was going. Completely ignoring the plea for mercy, Garrison squeezes the heretic's skull with brute force, pulling out piercing screams of pure pain. Showing not a drop of remorse for the torture, the healer coldly warns that the prayer is not over yet and demands gratitude. Tears and sweat run down the mage's face as he listens to the divine sentence announcing the end of his miserable existence. Calling upon the name of the holy light, the lethal grip shatters the enemy's body, turning him into a scattered mess. With silence returning to the battlefield, the exarch's imposing figure remains standing in the midst of total annihilation. A weird magical artifact that belonged to the necromancer falls quietly onto the grass after the body is destroyed. The boy's name is called out, breaking the built-up tension, but the mech keeps a very heavy look on his face. Analyzing the quick clash, the Dark Lord realizes that the divine monster practically put zero effort into wiping out the horde. Sweating cold, the former necromancer's calculating mind processes that just the overwhelming presence and wind pressure from the hits were already fatal. That freakish strength was enough to tear over 20 immortal bodies to pieces in the blink of an eye, with no chance to defend. Amidst the rubble and the fresh mess, the boy stares at the brutal hand held out to him, confirming that this priest is the real terror of his life. Holding the battered boy, Garrison mentions that he rushed over there as soon as he felt the necromancy aura. The exarch takes a mysterious pause and states that this whole situation is pretty fishy. He tightly grips the Mi's shoulder while assessing the leftover energy scattered in the cold air. The muscular healer concludes that the dark aura he felt did not seem to belong to the mage lying on the grass. Breaking a cold sweat over the spot, on deduction, Klein picks up on the priest's suspicion and goes on high alert. The heavy hand squeezes the injured flesh even harder, making the former lord conclude that one wrong move would mean his instant end. At that critical moment, Commander Dunkel's voice echoes through the clearing, frantically calling out for the air. The knight pulls the horse's reins, showing a lot of worry as he asks if the boy is safe. Surprised by the sudden arrival, the young man turns his head to face the leader of the family guard. However, his nose starts bleeding, proving that using necromancy was way too heavy a burden for that fragile body. Seeing the master's awful state, Dunkel panics and yells again, fearing the worst. The commander jumps off the horse and runs toward the isolated duo in the middle of the wrecked battlefield. While supporting the injured kid, he asks in horror about the brutal scene, but Klein just tells him not to shout since his legs gave out. The knight looks around totally confused and asks where Dalton wandered off to during all that chaos. Staring at the wreckage, the McColdley replies that he took the traitor down, while his remains lie abandoned on the dirt. Back at the mansion during a formal trial, the boy's calm voice echoes, justifying that he only reacted to an assassination attempt. Furious with the bold claim, someone slams the table violently, demanding an explanation for that nonsense. Count Cornwell, leader of the Branch family, stands up outraged and asks if they are seriously accusing his son of that crime. The noble defends the late son's character in front of the court, arguing that making up a murder story only makes the tragedy worse. Standing firm, Hinkle cuts off the rambling and warns that they should focus on finding the real culprit before jumping to conclusions. Holding an official document, the Duke emphasizes that Klein has not changed his side of the story even after long interrogations. He reveals a record proving the sudden disappearance of 20 mercenaries in enemy territory, pointing to Dalton setting up an ambush. The Count breaks a cold sweat realizing his goons left a trail, stuttering in the face of the undeniable proof. Trying to flip the script fast, the man argues that the story makes no sense since the kid has never held a sword in his life. The other nobles in the room start whispering in agreement, recalling that the clan leader himself had confirmed the heir's lack of mana. Feeling the heat, Cornwell figures his son's mess is beyond repair, but he needs to prevent his side of the family from going completely under. Trying to turn the tables in his favor, he proposes shifting the court's focus and questions the young master's true nature. The traitor brings up the bizarre rumors about the late Duchess and the boy's old claims of being the dreaded demon lord. Furious over the direct insult to his wife, Hinkle glares up and demands his subordinate to watch his mouth in that room. Completely ignoring the warning, the man shouts, accusing the boy of hiring mercenaries to take Dalton out of pure jealousy for his talent. The hysteria is suddenly cut short, making the Count look back in total shock as he recognizes the voice in the hall. Dressed sharply, Klein steps up looking imposing, stating that the enemy's ability to talk trash truly has no limits. With an unshakable posture, the Mick repeats that he acted in self-defense and that Priest Garrison showed up to save him from the undead. The branch leader points a shaking finger at the air, accusing the whole story of being a grotesque sham, showing off a menacingly glowing eye. The former necromancer sarcastically asks if the rumors of him being the real Archimonde are actually true. Faced with that intimidating aura, Cornwell gulps, feeling an irrational dread wash over him. Internally, the Dark Lord renews his vow to rebuild the family from scratch without letting parasites tear it down. His mental planning on how to punish the rival branch is paused by heavy knocks on the grand double doors. As the doors slowly open, a mysterious female voice apologizes for being late to the official meeting. Accompanied by her guard, the imposing Commander Laya of the Holy Lance Knights walks elegantly through the main hall. Looking at the beautiful blonde warrior, Klein tries to figure out the real reason she is crashing an internal clan trial. The other council members also find the Fall Wyvern family's involvement in the case weird, until the Duke takes the blame for the invite. Heinkel justifies her presence by explaining that the fallen mercenary had a long history of missions with the guest's Knight Order. Because of that, the commander also has the legal right to monitor how the investigation plays out on the estate. Keeping an intimidating stance, the powerful female knight turns her sharp gaze straight at the seated young master. Noticing the intense stare down, the boy watches the newcomer raise her hand, asking for permission to step in. Leaving the Mick totally confused, the blonde asks his father for permission to have an immediate private chat. While the master questions the warrior's sudden interest, Hinkle agrees to the request, making it clear it needs to be a quick chat. The patriarch tells his son to go along with the guest and come right back, forcing the guy to accept the invite with no other choice. Walking toward the exit feeling annoyed, Klein sighs in frustration over the constant arrogance that all top-tier knights seem to have. However, the necromancer's clever mind starts grinding, figuring out that this bizarre meeting might just be a golden opportunity. He theorizes that her motives basically come down to looking for confirmation, raising some baseless suspicion, or throwing a practical test his way. Walking down the long hallway beside the woman, the former lord firmly decides he will not back down from any challenge on his road to power. Determined to expand his political influence, he agrees to even use the imposing Fall Wyvern family to reach his goals. Suddenly, the metallic clicking of the knight's heeled boots echoes through the empty hall, and their walk comes to a halt. Silence fills the place as the commander lowers her gaze, wearing an expression full of mystery. She breaks the room's tension by murmuring a random word in a very suggestive tone. Leaning her body forward, Laya steps right into the boy's personal space and whispers, asking if she can touch him. Caught off guard by her boldness, the heir blushes with embarrassment and stands there in total shock, not believing the situation. That gutsy woman is the heir to one of the continent's 3 biggest ducal houses and an unmatched master in the art of the spear. The Order's official records describe the warrior's scary skills taking on hordes of evil orcs without any mercy. In the old military campaigns, she spun her heavy spear with perfect flow while the beasts roared, thirsty for destruction. With her eyes radiating a violent blue energy, the commander dashed across the field, cutting through the wind and charging into the chaos. The divine weapon's lethal blade sliced the foaming monsters in half, proving the unbeatable gap in physical strength. During a scouting op in the west, the young Prodigy single-handedly wiped out every lethal threat in the area. The mana hurricane wrecks the beasts, leaving only the winner's lonely silhouette glowing in the dark. Having purified the area all by herself, she cemented her legacy of undeniable brute strength. Back to the present, walking through the fancy mansion, the blonde sharply asks why the kid is dragging his feet so much. Klein picks up the pace, saying he is coming, but the woman coldly warns him not to fake any kind of friendship between them. The Make remembers Heinkel mentioning that his aunt was the neighboring duke's second wife, making them distant relatives. However, breaking down the noble bloodline, he concludes that the blonde was born from the first wife, which makes her a complete stranger with 0 blood ties. Stopping dead in her tracks, the commander turns her body and states that the next topic is strictly out of her own curiosity. Without giving him time to protest, she steps up fast and pins the tense guy against the wall, pulling a scream of surprise out of him. Keeping the suffocating closeness, the warrior tilts her face and repeats the inappropriate question, asking for permission to touch him. With the scene cutting to the sunny front of the estate, the boy yells desperately, questioning that crazy lady's complete lack of boundaries. Laya steps in and grabs the boy's hand without waiting for a green light. Checking out his skin, the commander notices the total lack of calluses or scars and points out that it feels like a baby's hand. Completely tense, Klein internally panics over the woman's move, while she explains that swordsmen train specific parts. Pressing crucial spots between his fingers, the warrior confidently states that tendons do not lie. The heir asks where she is going with this, and the woman concludes that he definitely did not swing a sword in that fight. Super close to his face, Laya says there is no trace of combat on him and wonders how the guy survived against 20 enemies. Right then, she bluntly brings up the theory that the young master used some other kind of hidden power to win. Catching onto the chat's goal, Klein steps back annoyed and asks if the guest is also going to accuse him of being the demon's reincarnation. Despite keeping a confident face on the outside, the mate quickly realizes the danger that warrior poses. Staring into the commander's sharp eyes, the necromancer notices the visit is not about logical answers, but rather to get a desperate reaction out of him. Weighing the risks of staying quiet, he decides the best defense is going bold and fires the provocation right back, asking, what if he really is the villain? The unexpected comeback totally shatters the woman's serious vibe, pulling a genuine and spontaneous burst of laughter from her. Easing the tension, Laya mocks the idea, thinking it is absolutely ridiculous for someone so short to be the Lord of Darkness. The mocking term takes a direct hit at the boy's ego, leaving him visibly bothered by the uncalled-for insult. Drawing a blank from that direct jab at his height instantly wrecks the former lord's arrogant attitude. Shaking with annoyance, the mech asks if he heard that right, but the commander doubles down on the insult without skipping a beat. The warrior tears down the guy's self-esteem by listing his physical flaws and arguing that he lacks even an ounce of an imposing presence. Even knowing her claims are wrong, the emotional blow hits hard as he hears that he would never beat a real knight. Wrapping up the roast, Laya makes a bold bet, promising a kiss if the young man actually proves his true strength. The heir stays dead silent, trying to process the absurdity of that wild offer coming out of nowhere. He tries to figure out the motives behind that crazy woman's actions and gives up on using logic due to his extreme mental exhaustion. The commander announces it is getting late and turns her back to head to the hall, leaving the kid standing right there in the corridor. While walking down the late afternoon lit halls, the woman keeps a mysterious look as she sizes up the situation. Far from the boy, the knight thinks to herself that the real demon lord would never act with such a lack of control. Returning to the courtroom, the duo's name is announced out loud to all the council members present in the fancy room. Taking his seat again, Klein thinks to himself that he let his guard down because he saw himself just as a problematic newly arrived son. Count Cornwell keeps boiling with anger on the other side and refuses to buy the cheap excuse of self-defense presented. Taking advantage of the break in the shouting, Patriarch Hinkle politely asks about the main topic of that private chat. Laya takes charge of the situation, opening her mouth to promptly answer the Duke's direct question. But, in a sudden fit of rage, the young master violently drives a sharp blade straight into the heavy council table. The sudden crash of the sword startles the commander and the family leader instantly. Staring down the guy responsible for the false accusations, Klein declares that he is going to prove the truth by force himself. Gripping the weapon tight, the boy tells the man to stop stalling and suggests settling the beef the traditional northern way. Without a single drop of hesitation in his eyes, the heir formally challenges the enemy to a lethal trial by combat. The bold statement echoes through the hall, causing shock and disbelief among all the nobles in the room. The technique is an ancient, ruthless method for settling scores where there are no rules, and the winner of the duel dictates the absolute truth. Stuttering from nerves, the rival lord tries to argue against the extreme call, but Klein guarantees he has plenty of reasons to fight. The boy points out that besides trying to frame him for a setup, the Count also openly disrespected his mother's memory. Internally, the necromancer admits he could not care less about the house's former matriarch, but he knows the public excuse fits his plans perfectly. Pressuring the rival council member again, the Mick demands an immediate answer to the fatal challenge thrown on the table. Whispers fill the hall as the nobles get hyped over the return of this brutal tradition that the new generations pretty much forgot about. Taking on his unshakable role as the top leader, Hinkle makes the duel official, guaranteeing the violent outcome will be accepted as the final word. The Count starts thinking about the archaic rules and gets excited. realizing the evidence against him completely loses its value on the spot. Seeing a clear shot at an easy win, the man sarcastically asks how the weak heir plans to actually fight. With a dark smirk on his wrinkled face, the noble warns that he will use a substitute champion, planning the violent end of the young master. Not flinching at the direct taunt, Klein tells the enemy to get the casket ready because his late son's defeat is going to repeat itself right there. The blood pact is quickly sealed with the thirsty count accepting the official showdown set for 4 days from then. Watching the scene quietly, Laya fully understands that the kid wants to use the fallen as a stepping stone to demand brutal respect in the decaying clan. The sun starts setting on the horizon, marking the end of the hectic trial at the main family's grand estate. Inside a very luxurious room in the mansion, a loud and high-pitched scream echoes, piercing the indoor night's silence. Totally freaked out by the news of the fight, D-Line steps up in disbelief and questions his little brother's sanity. Sitting pretty casually in his chair, the boy sighs tiredly, repeating that he is fully aware of all the lethal risks. The blonde swordsman freezes in total shock upon finding out that their own dad calmly greenlit that senseless suicidal stunt. Desperate to fix the mess, D-Line immediately offers to step in as the champion, but gets a cold and direct refusal from the boy. Standing up to face the eldest, the necromancer drops some hard truths, warning that the future leader of the North cannot get his hands dirty with trash. The blonde backs down, realizing that stepping into the arena would tarnish his honor and hand the family's leadership over to their enemies on a silver platter. The former lord gets his brother's frustration of being tied down by politics, but reaffirms the vital need to fix his own rep with a fight. Keeping a heavy tone of absolute certainty, Klein declares he will not back out of the plan right after remembering bits of their distant past. An old, nostalgic memory fills the room, revealing the eldest's pure joy as he ran to meet his newborn brother. The soft image of a tiny baby hand grabbing bigger fingers reflects the genuine affection that D-Line always quietly nurtured. The kid's innocent, lit-up gaze admiring the youngest for the first time proves the strong brotherly love that started in that room. Snapping back to the bitter present, the blonde says he does not care about having different moms and exposes the huge emotional pain of waiting 7 years. Unable to hold back his despair and bottled-up anguish, he steps up and grabs his little brother's shirt in a surprisingly physical outburst. Heavy tears roll down the Prodigy swordsman's face, leaving the feared Dark Lord completely confused by that level of affection. Before he can finish his dramatic venting, the genuine crying is suddenly cut off by a knock on the room's wooden door. A very stiff-postured soldier walks in, apologizing for the interruption, and announces that the rival counselor has already picked his deadly rep. Quickly wiping his face to play it cool, the older brother shakes off the embarrassment and worriedly asks about the feared enemy's track record. With a very tense look, the messenger reports that it is Randall, a highly dangerous ex-warrior exiled from the enemy empire. Far from there, the heavy, rotting wooden doors of a hidden dungeon start creeping open, squeaking loudly in the dark. An imposing, stuffed wild lion head on the damp wall decorates the sickening room housing the dreaded outcast mercenary. A very thick, red liquid pours from a barrel, quickly filling up a filthy wooden bucket right to its rotting brim. The terrifying setting, packed with dirty weapons and old torture devices, proves that monster's uncontrollable thirst for destruction. With absolutely zero table manners, the brutal warrior lifts the bucket and chugs the crimson drink in a wild, animalistic way. With a face covered in nasty scars, the cruel assassin cracks a sick smile, eager to hear the terrified screams of a young boy once again. In total contrast to his opponent's insanity, Klein maintains his icy, unshakable stance, ready to wipe out just another useless roadblock.